Welcome back to the studio. Good to see you.
Good to see you, Corey. Thanks for inviting me back.
Oh, it's always good, and we got so much going on, and I just, as I said, I appreciate having your voice of experience to lend to things. I don't want to make too many comments about age necessarily. Experience.
That's very kind of you. I caught the tail end of your rant, and I thought you were right on the money. I think that the average Canadian and Albertan, since we're mainly speaking to Albertans here, is that just appalled at this latest example of government waste on the part of the Governor General.
Yeah, and it just never stops. I mean, one of the commenters, Richard Blackburn, saying, one Governor General after Governor General, yet we just keep doing it. Like we get mad every few years, we forget about it, we just put another one in, and we keep repeating, rinse, wash, repeat.
Well, and I think that increasingly, certainly those people in Western Canada that pay attention to what's going on in Ottawa have to question why there's no criteria, and that you can measure people against when the Prime Minister appoints the Governor General or senators. Clearly there should be something as a job description and something that we can sort of judge them by.
Yeah, well, I mean, as a senator, even there's some potential roles or things that they could, be doing in power. But I mean, realistically, a Governor General now is a figurehead. I mean, it's an important one, technically a very powerful person. But I said kind of in an earlier rant at the start of the show, I bet we could find somebody for half of that salary who could do it very well, a good public speaker, a presenter who could represent and give out the medals and cut the ribbons, because that's really what they do.
Yeah. I'm sure there's lots of highly qualified people. I think the worst recent example, and you mentioned her on your show, is Payette. Obviously, I don't know what screening took place before the Prime Minister Trudeau appointed her, but obviously it was inadequate.
Oh, yeah, and I was ranting earlier about that. I mean, because even in her first year, she was complaining about her job. I mean, that's what really got me worked up. I was researching for my rant, and I found one of my old blog posts from a few years ago, me going after her then, because, wow, you're making $300,000 a year with all your expenses, everything else, and you're saying, quit making me come in to sign these bills. It's tiring. I don't want to have to do all this. Yeah, exactly. Oh, you poor darling. Oh, well, I'll get on to some other stuff. I've been ranting on that for a while. We've got perhaps some opportunities for change. I kind of want to talk about, we got two Conservative parties in leadership races right now. I mean, they're going to obviously be very important for the parties, hopefully very important for the country and the province, depending on who wins it. The federal race is kind of dragging. It's going to be a long one, I mean, it's already been going for quite a while, and it's going into September. They're all positioning themselves. The memberships have closed now. How do you think that's looking? Like, where is that going right now?
Well, I think that there's general concern, certainly in Western Canada, whether Pierre Poilievre can actually win. He's certainly got a strong, base of support here in the West. It's ironic, I guess, that at least at this point, he hasn't accepted the invitation from Western Standard to participate in the debate that the paper has organized, and so we'll see where that goes. I mean, all the other, five? Yeah, five of the candidates have all accepted the invitation to
four now. We're working on it, and there's part of the problems, I think, that happens in politics. A bit of it's strategic. We see that a lot, as often with a front runner or a incumbent. We know that from town hall meetings or election forums. When it comes, they often will decline on those because they realize, well, we don't feel that there's a lot that can be gained, but if we get in there and screw up, there's a lot we can lose.
Exactly. So, and that's sort of the traditional position of the front runner. And obviously Pierre and his supporters consider him to be the front runner. So as you say, they have to weigh that balance about, the risk, whether you can gain sufficient to take that risk is really what it comes down to. And as front runner, they often will decline these invitations because of that. So, I mean, we'll have to see how this develops. It's an interesting race, I guess, as a Conservative. I mean, lifelong reformer / Canadian Alliance / Conservative member of Parliament. Obviously, I have an interest in seeing how that develops. But I guess we could talk about what comes next. That's what you and I were discussing previously on your program, is for most Albertans and Canadians, I think you have to look beyond the existing race. Okay, so it's fine to win the race and become the leader of that party, whether it's the Conservative Party of Canada, the CPC nationally, or the United Conservative Party, the UCP, provincially. It's fine to win the race, but what comes next? How well positioned are they to take that next big, hopefully victory as a Conservative? I'd say hopefully victory, and win either as Premier or as Prime Minister.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big task, and it's a different type of task. It's a different strategy. I mean, winning among ostensibly Conservative members, you can say a lot of the good Conservative language to get in there.
Yeah.
Next, if you're trying for the general populace, well, if we're going to follow our ideals, you would stick to your Conservative message, and you'll sell it well enough to enough Canadians that they will embrace it. What often happens, though, is they get in, and then they say, well, the only way I can win now is to expand the base by going more liberal.
Yeah.
And but I mean, that's failed for two candidates in a row.
Yeah. Well, hopefully whoever wins doesn't go that route. That, as you say, they try to sell a Conservative message to Toronto, Montreal, and points east, as opposed to trying to change the party. And of course, that was the big problem that many Westerners in particular had with Mr. O'Toole, is he no sooner won the leadership of the Conservative Party as he started to say, well, Conservatives have to change. It's not that people down east had to change to a more conservative philosophy, if you will. It was that the party and the membership was expected to change. And that didn't sit very well with a lot of Conservatives, particularly here in the West.
No, and it does seem to be the cycle of battle, though, right? And then the Conservative members, we are the most notorious for ripping out our own leaders. I mean, we're unforgiving when they tick us off.
Yeah.
And that's happened to the last two leaders in a row. They were pulled down from their own. Same with Premier Kenney.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they have to manage to, as you said, the big what if after they win. Okay, they got a couple of big tasks. Not only do they have to try and win an election, they still got to keep those members happy too while they're at it, whether it's caucus or at a ground level. And it's quite a juggling act.
I have given this a considerable thought in the last while, as I suspect a lot of Canadians are, when we look at the National Party, the CPC's leadership race, because people are saying, well, you know, at the moment, Pierre Poilievre has a very strong Conservative base. When I say conservative, fiscal conservatism, even in many respects, social conservatism. I mean, he seems to be appealing, as Mr. O'Toole did, to that hardcore base. And so then people have been saying to me, you know, based upon my experience, say, well, you know, how would he morph, as you're suggesting, Corey, how would he morph to actually be in a position to win the prime ministership? And I've been saying, well, there's a number of factors that might work in his favor were he to win. You know, is he actually the front runner, first of all? And then secondly, under this goofy system they have of the equality of all ridings, regardless of the size of the membership, can he actually win? And, you know, that remains to be seen on September 10th. But my point is that you and I, because we do have some gray hair, we know that in most cases, governments are defeated. They're not elected. And by that, I mean that they all have a lifespan, if you will. And at some point, the electorate gets tired of them. And that'll happen, believe it or not, even with Justin Trudeau, I think. And we're starting to see that a little bit in some of the criticism coming out of the mainstream media in the last while. They've been so silent as far as criticizing him. But in the last while, that's starting to change. So is that a sign that Central and Eastern Canada might be becoming a bit more critical of Justin Trudeau and his government? We would hope so. Us in the West would hope so. So timing is everything. Perhaps whether it's Pierre or Mr. Charest or whoever becomes the next Conservative leader, timing might be right. And they might be able to sell a Conservative message, not really because people are embracing that message, but because they're tired of the Liberals and they feel they've had their chance.
They're ready for somebody else. The opportunity's there. Yeah, and we are seeing that. I mean, I'll name a couple. Yeah, Don Martin came out with just a scathing tear into Justin Trudeau.
Yeah.
And Selly was another one, I believe, that, again, very critical and saying maybe as the veneer is coming off, the members are getting tired, the Liberal members are getting tired. So, I mean, it provides opportunity.
Well, we saw with the mandate issue, right? All of the opposition to these travel mandates that has been building and building and building. And yet it appears to be that it took the insiders, I'll call them, the Liberal members of Parliament themselves, where they finally said, enough, this is ridiculous. We're the only country left on the planet, basically, that still has these travel mandates in place. And it took that kind of pressure, internal pressure, before Trudeau eventually said, okay, I'll lift the mandates.
Well, we'll be watching with interest. They've got a lot to work with, but again, as you said, there's 2 races they got to do: win the leadership and win the election.
Exactly.
Even more immediately pressing, I'll move into the provincial one. So we got quite one developing. I believe now there's 9 candidates announced for this one. We'll see. I'll kind of start on that bar they set. What's the party signaling when they're saying you have to come up with $175,000 in 2 months just to run?
Yeah.
That bugs me. I got to admit. I mean, I understand the need for a bar, but setting it that purposely high, I don't think it shows respect for the grassroots.
No, not at all. I would agree 100% with you. The last time I was on your program, we discussed that because we didn't know what the threshold would be at that point. And we also discussed, as I recall, Corey, the challenge that whoever runs and whoever wins and becomes our next premier by default is, at least for a few months, they'll be premier and hopefully longer. The challenges that they have. And one of those challenges, I believe, is to try to convince people that they're not elitists, that they're not insiders, and they will not govern like Jason Kenney did, or he allegedly did, which is that, it was his way or the highway. He only consulted apparently with a very small number of people, sort of his core group of 2 or 3 advisors, didn't even listen to his own cabinet or his caucus. And I think that was really what eventually inflamed the rank and file membership of the United Conservative Party against Mr. Kenney, was this, whether it's right or not, the perception, and in politics, perception is reality, the perception that he wasn't listening to anybody but a few insiders. And so the challenge will be for all of these candidates, especially the cabinet ministers, especially former leaders like Brian Jean and Danielle Smith, to convince Albertans at large, not just the UCP membership, convince Albertans at large that they can broaden their base, that they will listen to the people as opposed to a few key insiders. So.
Yeah, and I mean, that's something we used to, pride ourselves as reformers way back in the time. The fundraising numbers were always great because it showed it was $10 here, it was $50 there, it was a KFC bucket passed at a town hall meeting, or a cowboy hat.
Yeah.
And it was still, it added up to a lot of money. People really, reached deeply and funded that party and that movement as it went, and thousands of people did. But with this bar set and the timeline, it means no matter who gets into this race, it means they had a few very heavy duty donors in order to pull it off. They just don't have the time to build that network of grassroots support. But then it's hard to sell yourself then when clearly you're at least a little beholden to 5 or 6 heavy duty donors or action groups or something of this sort in order to get in it. It's just an unfortunate way they went.
I couldn't agree more. And, there again, the last time I was on your program a couple of weeks back, we were talking about that. We were talking about the advantage for the party, and certainly for the individual, to have somebody that's widely viewed as an outsider, a bridge builder, we used to call them in the Reform Party. Somebody that could appeal to all, like urban and rural, was as comfortable in a boardroom talking to businessmen in Calgary or Edmonton as he or she would be, standing with some crap on their boots in a farmyard. And someone that could appeal to all age groups, which would by necessity probably mean not myself, not a gray-haired fella. We need somebody that can appeal to the next generation because it's them that's facing a lot of the challenges today.
Yeah, and I don't fault the candidates. They weren't a part of the committee. So those who were entering and those who managed to make it, they did what they have to do to get in. Richard Blackburn saying, he agrees it's high, but, you have to have something in place, to ensure there aren't 40 candidates. And I agree, but we've always said there should be a bar. But, I've always said like 50 grand. That's a pretty good chunk. Even add another 20 for a deposit on top of that. So we're talking 70. That's pretty sizable. A person isn't casually just going to, especially if they don't think they're going to win it, just throw that out there and jump in. That's still going to keep it down to a number. But it's too late now. I guess it's the way it is. That's the way it's set.
Yeah.
So a little on where they're going, though. So they've been talking things that more of you and I's language, and a lot of regionalism is really coming up right now. Danielle was on the show and she was talking about her Sovereignty Act she's proposing. Brian Jean is talking about Alberta autonomy right on front and center on his campaign. Michelle Rempel's looking to dip her toe in the water, perhaps, and she was again talking about standing up to Ottawa. So we're seeing a much more regionalist flavor from the candidates so far. You think that's going to set as a theme throughout the campaign, or maybe they're getting that out early so they can get to policy later?
Well, I hope it is. And I said that right from the beginning as soon as Mr. Kenney announced that he was going to be stepping down. And, basically that was the start of the replacement race at that time. And I said right away, I hope that every single candidate that eventually runs not only commits to greater autonomy for Alberta and curbing the Ottawa overreach and the infringement on the province's really the basis of our economy. And when we look in particular, of course, the oil and gas industry and what's happened to that because of I would almost call it seems like a personal vendetta on the part of the Prime Minister to destroy our industry. And yet it's the cash cow, it's the golden goose, if you will, that's funding the country. It makes no sense, but then so much of what Justin Trudeau does makes no sense.
Yeah, well, and we're talking with a federal ideologically driven government. They don't listen to common sense. I was talking to Franco Terrazzano from the Taxpayers Federation earlier in the show, and again, we're just stumped. I mean, Chrystia Freeland, okay, we don't expect much of the Liberal government, but still, I mean, just the most basic thing, is you can't keep spending or you're going to cause inflation. And for her to stand up and say, we're going to spend $9 billion more to fight inflation,
it makes no sense.
So this is not a government we can expect rational behavior from. So even though they're as reliant on oil for their revenues as anybody else is, they're still trying to attack it. They're still trying to knock it down. Yeah. Just like Joe Biden saying, oh, it's not my fault that the prices are high throughout North America. And now hold my hat while I go snivel for oil over in Saudi Arabia. And I don't want any more Canadian stuff. It just defies sense.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think increasingly, hopefully, I say this, increasingly Canadians, in particular Western Canadians, are getting fed up with this hypocrisy on the part of leadership, whether it's in the States or here in Canada. And increasingly, people are calling them out on it, and well, they should. I know the one thing that prompted me a couple of years ago, you and I have talked about this, to come out of my retirement at the time and start that new political party, the Maverick Party, was this sense that that I was just fed up with the hypocrisy, where our political leadership say you and I, as sort of average Canadians, should do such and such, but then they turn around and don't apply those same rules to themselves. And I hope that the apathy that we've seen on the part of a lot of Canadians as they struggle, as you said earlier in the program, to meet their mortgage payments, to put food on the table, fuel in the car in order to go to work. As they struggle under those, that the apathy that we see towards politics will end, and there will be more people involved in things like the Freedom Convoy that say enough, we're fed up.
The apathy tends to go away when you finally get kicked in the butt.
Yeah.
Talking about green things, climate emergencies, plans like that, that's all beautiful until you can't pay the rent.
Yeah.
Until you can't feed your kids well enough, or choosing between keeping them well dressed for school or buying a decent food. So I think people will be ready for change if the right person approaches them. So I mean, I think part of this regionalist approach too is, we're seeing that too from establishment candidates, Taze and others. They're trying to carefully distance themselves from Kenney while not being insulting at the same time. But every candidate has to explain, why am I different than Kenney? Because he was rejected by the members. I mean, there was no getting around that. And a large part of that was the Fair Deal panel. That was one of the things that really soured me. Like, I was optimistic. Hey, you're going to strike this panel. You're going to go out. The panel comes back with 25 recommendations, all of which I like. And you know what he did? Nothing. Not a damn thing. So, I mean, it looks like
in fairness, he held a referendum.
Yes. Okay.
But then what happened after that? Yeah. After, 60-some percent, 63%, I think it was, of Albertans, said, there's something wrong here. We're voting against equalization as it's presently constituted in Canada. And I think with good reason, that Albertans, especially when you get down to the family unit, are struggling. They were struggling hard then. They're still struggling under the weight of taxes and increasing costs, inflation. You mentioned earlier the idiocy of our federal government, where they spent hundreds of billions of dollars, over the life of this COVID epidemic, what we believed was a COVID epidemic, And, they couldn't make the connection that you spend that kind of money, you push that amount of money into society, you're going to fuel inflation.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I think that the average person, whether they're, a truck driver, a waitress, a farmer, whatever, just the average Canadian out there would say, that makes no sense. I mean, you're going to spend that kind of money, you are going to fuel inflation.
It's just basic economics. I've been just, when I get bored, I search through some of my old tweets from a year or two ago, just to remind people and retweet myself. This is what I said a year and a half ago, guys. We can't keep pretending we didn't see it coming. Everybody kept saying, keep spending like this, we're going to get inflation. And lo and behold, here it is. I love it when I can say I told you so. It's a lot easier when I say, no, shit, I blew it, which I get to say now and then as well.
Yeah, but as you point out, Corey, that even, having the advantage of saying I told you so, it doesn't help us in our present situation. That a lot of people, not just you and I, but a lot of people can look back at what they wrote as a guest column in my case, or journalism in yours, or statements that you've made in the past. That doesn't help today.
Well, what it does help is we still have time to stop.
Yeah.
You didn't listen a year ago, but we're still spending now, so that the advice still applies. It can get worse.
Yeah. Anyway, back to the UCP leadership. I think the big challenge for some of these candidates is going to do exactly what you just mentioned a minute ago, is to distance themselves from the previous administration. And the cabinet ministers, and in particular, Travis Taves, that is a huge hill for him to climb, to be able to say to, first of all, the UCP membership, and then provided he was successful, then to Albertans, oh, well, that was Jason Kenney. That wasn't me. I won't operate that way. Well, as some people, I think it was Lowen said recently, well, why didn't he speak out then? Well, it was obvious why he didn't speak out, because the minute you do,
joining Lowen on the other end of the caucus.
Exactly. Yeah. He certainly wouldn't have been in cabinet, and it's only a short step after that to not even be in caucus. So, there are constraints there. Nobody knows it better than a former whip. Yes. The control that the party and the leader has over his caucus.
So, I mean, this, like the other one, is going to be a two-phase race. It's going to be who wins. I think that the regionalism is really to planned strategically to reach out to those members who were really alienated by the lack of action, or feeling of lack of action on Kenney's part. If it works, one of them is going to win. They get in. Now they've got 6 months, maybe a short session in the legislature. I think they're going to have to hit the ground running with some action but careful action if they're going to win the next election in spring. That's going to take some pretty good political acumen.
Yeah. And I would say, that hopefully whoever it is going to learn a bit from history. One is that you have to have a united team. So the first thing is to try to, heal the wounds that are going to develop during the leadership race. We've seen that time and time again, no more so than currently happening with the CPC race, where they're just sniping at each other constantly and dragging each other down. Hopefully we don't see that level in the provincial race. So the first task obviously will be to heal the internal divisions within the UCP. The worst case scenario is that, if somebody wins that, like a Travis Taves, it's viewed as sort of a conservative, that the Wild Rose folks say, well, to hell with that. That wasn't my guy that won, so I'm leaving. And that was part of the problem, I think, all along, where you saw people like Brian Jean that were highly divisive right from the get-go after Jason Kenney won the leadership. And so you've got that constant pressure and criticism, no matter what you do.
Well, we got a lot of, all the candidates, well, aside from a couple that you don't hear of, but the ones that we know of have some baggage that they're carrying and in that sort of way. I mean, Danielle Smith, of course, made a catastrophic decision when she was leading the Wild Rose Party. That's definitely her biggest hurdle to try and overcome as she's coming in. I mean, she said it 100 times, and I think she's convinced some people, but some are still hesitant, that she's learned and realizes it was an error, and it's made her better for it. But a lot won't necessarily believe that. Brian Jean has been very divisive as well. I mean, he kind of stomped out the door once the leadership was over, and would he be more cooperative getting in? Michelle Rempel's now talking. Likewise with this federal race, with some of her poking on behalf of the Brown team, it's been pretty nasty from within. So they've really got their work cut out for them. I mean, sometimes the candidates you haven't heard of might have an advantage for some sour.
The challenge, though, as you've already pointed out, Corey, and I can't agree more with you, is that for an outsider to raise that kind of money and meet those hurdles that they've put in place, it's just what, a couple months away, a month and a half, 6 weeks away, where they got to write those big checks to the party, is going to be a real challenge. I mean, I don't think that many of these people that are well-known names, for good or bad, as you point out, they have their baggage, but they also have the advantage of being a household name, have a better chance of raising that kind of money in a short period of time. So we'll have to see where that goes. But there's no question that these people are going to have to distance themselves from their own past. What we need to look for with all leadership races and all potential leaders is two key things. And you and I touched on it before. A leader has to have courage to withstand the pressure that undoubtedly will come, and they have to have judgment. Well, you just mentioned Danielle Smith. I think the big question still in a lot of Albertans' minds is, does she have the judgment to be our next premier? And that'll be the hurdle for her, I think.
Yeah, it's going to be a tough one. I mean, she's gathering some steam. She was well received on the show, but again, a lot of critique, a lot of questioning. When everybody makes mistakes, yes, but some mistakes are bigger than others, and it's so directly applied.
Yes.
So, I mean, and again, one of the things Danielle always talked about, I mean, another aspect you mentioned, though, is managing caucus, keeping them together then and united, whether it's Taves. I mean, he's definitely a contender for this. He's well established. He's got the baggage of being within the government, but he's personally never done anything untoward. If he comes in, though, he's going to have to reach out then to the alienated ones. He's going to have to reach out to Drew Barnes, Todd Lowen, even, Leela here. I mean, the list is fairly long of some outspoken caucus members that you can't afford to just say, well, you're out now and we're done with you. No, you got to pull these people in convincingly, or you are going to go into the next election with hornet's nest fighting within your caucus.
And I think that most of us recognize that, as I said previously, sort of the non-socialists, which I hope are still the majority of Albertans that don't believe in socialism of the type that's being peddled by the NDP, both provincially and federally. The non-socialist Albertans have got to feel that this is, regardless of who wins, that this is a team they can get behind, that this is a team that's united, that, as you say, there's room for everybody inside the tent, keep everybody pulling in the traces together, and we'll see where that goes. But if they don't do that, if they can't, there's an age-old thing that I'm often reminded about when it comes to political parties, and that is if they're divisive and they're seen as that they can't. It's like if you can't govern yourself, what would lead you to believe that you should ask, in this case, Albertans to give you the chance to govern them?
Yeah,
and that's the challenge for all of them.
And their timeline is tight. Well, I'm going to be, before I let you go, I will be interviewing all of them, I'm sure, over the course of this. I got 3 more of the leadership candidates coming up just next week alone, and I had Danielle yesterday. So what would you think I should ask them as a prime question?
Well, I think, for me at least, and obviously as the founder of the Maverick Party, the big issue, and you got back to it with your mention of the Fair Deal panel recommendations, is that why is it that nobody has taken a look at the 5 constitutional amendments that I put forward as part of the Maverick platform? And actually to draw attention, it's not like we'll ever accomplish them, but draw attention to the inequities and the unfairness that Ottawa heaps on Western Canada. Nobody has mentioned that type of thing and said, okay, well, it's unlikely that that's ever going to be accomplished, but that's what needs to be accomplished if Albertans are ever going to be treated fairly. So, and the Fair Deal panel, another one. It's not enough that these people, and I question Danielle Smith in the sense of calling it a sovereignty act, because my belief is that as soon as you talk about sovereignty or separatism, you're going to lose people, right? If you talk about autonomy or some form of independence, and that's what I was trying to do with Maverick, was talk about the need for greater independence, and where we stop along the spectrum is up to Albertans and up to Westerners. So you can have independence at various levels and enacting various things along the way from the Fair Deal panel, as an example.
Yeah.
But if I was asking them questions, I'd be saying, okay, what's your timeline? How have you prioritized what you're going to do? Like whether it's a pension plan, whether it's control of taxation, whether it's you know, that you're going, as she has mentioned, there's certain federal laws she's going to say, you know, they shouldn't apply to Alberta. That's fine. How are you going to do that? And what is your timeline? Because one of the lessons with Mr. Kenney, as you say, was the disappointment that he didn't walk the talk.
You do have to follow through. Well,
Yeah.
There'll be lots to talk about and lots to watch. So thanks for coming in to talk with us today. I'm sure we'll talk again further soon as things
Well, I hope so.
develop.
Yeah, I always enjoy our conversations. Thanks so much, Corey.
Good to see you, Jay.
All right.
I'll talk to you later.